Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, as today we're playing as Lilith. So we're going to Mom's Heart, which I think is the perfect goal in terms of balance of how far you go versus how many shenanigans there are in a run. If you're going only to Mom's Foot, you find the shovel, you're kind of forced to take it because that's gonna be really the only way to get more points, or maybe you need to be very meticulous on which sacrifice room you take. Sometimes you take the sacrifice room on maybe Caves 1, but then you find out that there was a way to go forward, maybe a lucky shovel. And in terms of, like, I would say cheesy tactics and just going, maybe getting more points in a very cheap way, Mom's Heart isn't as bad, but it still does allow the run to be quite shorter than the usual. You're not really forced to go through some of those difficult floors. There aren't really any of the big objectives like Hush or maybe even Mega Satan, and for all of that, I would say that would combine itself to be one of the best daily goals, especially when you're playing a character like Lilith. It's just gonna be more pronounced that way, because you're kind of forced in this uncomfortable position with this character, especially when you get something like Mom's Knife, which is what we get in the first Devil deal, and in most cases you would just be ecstatic, because obviously it's such a great item, but with Lilith, it's not really... It doesn't really turn out to be that way, just mainly because it's hard to use, and you have to kind of account for another, maybe, point of movement, which is your incubus, if you want to shoot at the enemy. So if you're stuck in a position where maybe you don't have a lot of speed, or maybe you don't have a lot of damage or any fun synergies, then you're gonna be forced to go through a slog of a run, and of course, because you try to get as many points as possible, you're gonna try to do the exploration, you're gonna try to go to as many rooms as possible, and if you're just frustrated most of the time, which I think you're gonna be if you're playing as Lilith, because there are so many, I would say, uncomfortable rooms with obstacles, and it's hard to hit an enemy, you kind of have to wait for him to get into position. And when you consider all of that, then I think it's a good idea that this run only goes to Mom's Heart, and that we're not really forced to go past some of those, I would say, more annoying objectives. But besides that, I think something very interesting happened in this one, and I feel like when you get something like Mom's Knife, which is obviously, like I said before, a very powerful item on its own, even if it's a bit annoying to use, it still gives you so much DPS that you can afford to replace your box of friends. And first of all, I took the Book of Revelations here just to maybe get a little bit more spirit hearts. Of course, I was banking on maybe finding a sacrifice room at a certain point, and I figured it's just gonna be a better idea to stockpile on hearts now so I can actually use them in the sacrifice room in the future, of course, if one tends to appear. But obviously, soul hearts were they're a good thing. I'm kind of getting maxed out on this point, and kind of sticking to the Book of Revelations, I think, wouldn't be the wisest choice, because the Ivy Bag is just gonna give me more points on average. So I decided to stick with that one, and I figure, you know, because I have the Cambion Conception, and every time I get hit, I kind of increase or get closer to that next level where I'm gonna get my next familiar. Ivy Bag is just gonna be much better for me, and it's also kind of gonna allow me to get more points just in the average case scenario. So I stick with the Ivy Bag, of course, until further notice. I'm not against maybe replacing this particular item with maybe just some random Devil deal. I'm kind of mainly looking forward to just maybe using the Ivy Bag as more of a defensive maneuver when I get the Polaroid. Of course, what I want to do is kind of get in close and personal, use my orbitals, use my Mom's Knife on those boss rush bosses, and hopefully that's gonna allow me to kind of get forward. And that strategy was kind of, I would say, not encompassed, but definitely improved by getting Poison Touch, because now suddenly, as soon as we maybe get invisibility frames, we get the shield from the Polaroid, we can run into enemies and not only deal damage with the orbitals and the knife, but we can also poison them. And if you don't know what this poison does, every time you poison an enemy, and if they die from the poison, there's a very high chance that you would get your black heart back, which means that if you use the Ivy Bag in a position, we get the money, we get invisibility, and hopefully, you know, we also get whatever we essentially paid for that particular heart, and we get it back. As long as we have red health, we actually have, I would say, an infinite supply of black health, which is gonna be something that's gonna be obviously very useful if we intend to play a sacrifice room at a certain point. And as I was kind of going through this daily, and just, I would say at this point, I realized that I needed to maybe change up my strategy a little bit. And I did get a little Brimstone, which is obviously very useful, but I think overall, my damage just wasn't where I wanted it to be. And obviously, this is not something you can control or affect, but I figured, you know, I can't really rely on my Mom's Knife that much, because it is unreliable, and this is maybe why I figured having the Ivy Bag is gonna be a much better idea overall. And maybe what was very surprising to me is that you can see I have 4.5 damage. Later on, I get Proptosis, and I have a Lump of Coal, and I really expected to do more damage, but it felt like the more damage upgrades I actually picked up, the less damage I did overall. And I don't know if that's, I would say, a consequence of maybe a weird synergy of some items, or maybe that's just how the game calculates damage. Maybe Proptosis actually reduces your damage, and because I'm not shooting from my actual tears, but I'm shooting from my incubus, that damage is actually reduced instead of increased. I'm not sure if that's how it works. I don't think it is how it works, because I'm pretty sure I would be aware of it at this point. But honestly, with some mechanics of this game being so obscure and really, I would say, confusing to think about, I'm not putting it behind me. But it definitely felt like I was doing glass damage after I picked up certain items like the lump of coal, and of course I mentioned proptosis after I get it from being boss rush. But luckily my plan was solid. I didn't really need to rely on Mom's Knife too much, so I was able to kind of keep in this position where I used the Ivy Bag, I damaged myself, I got a bit of Polaroid invisibility, and I was able to run into enemies. And of course, every time an enemy died, there was a high chance of actually getting a black heart back, so I just had this sustainable infinite combo where I actually dealt a lot of damage, but also I was able to really get more health than I actually started out with. So it turned out for the better. Obviously, there were still some instances of dumb damage where I really shouldn't have taken them, and I always feel bad, because when I have the Ivy Bag, I feel like there shouldn't be an instance where I take damage, because I can always defend it. Obviously, I can always press the spacebar button, and I kind of started doing that on the Dark Room, but for some reason earlier than that, a lot of the damage I've actually ended up taking was so fast, I couldn't even really react in time. And even if I was able to kind of mitigate that damage by just pressing the spacebar button, I don't think it would have helped me that much, because I was always stuck in a very compromising situation. Like, I entered the room and there was an enemy who was maybe very fast, and they just started running into me. I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to maybe avoid or predict that. Obviously, one of it is just have inhumane reactions, or maybe just a little bit faster than I was. But it was definitely something I felt like was out of my control. So I didn't feel too bad for getting hit, and especially whenever there is a sacrifice room daily, a run that goes to the Dark Room with the sacrifice room, you just know you're gonna take so much damage just from going to those spikes that I don't feel too bad about taking damage in other aspects. Obviously, that's not, I would say, the right mindset to have when you enter this, because I shouldn't maybe explain or try to, what's the word, to justify, that's the one, to justify my other damage taken, because I know I'm gonna take so much damage from the sacrifice room, but you know, it is what it is. I can't really go back and untake the damage, so I think the only other way is to just maybe accept it and be okay with it. So as we were going through the Dark Room, I wasn't too worried. Like I said before, I did have this combo, and I did use it much more, I would say, meticulously this time. I was much more defensive with it, and I felt like it was just a difficult room. Maybe if I wasn't in any immediate danger, I thought I would use it preventatively, just because it's gonna give me more chance of actually blocking a hit, because every time you're gonna get hit, it's not gonna be something that's obvious. You know, maybe sometimes you're gonna walk into a spike or something like that, but in majority of cases, you know, it's just gonna be you who's stuck in a position where an enemy or a bullet is gonna fly from you from a direction you're not expecting. And I just decided, if I felt like it was gonna be a hard room, like the room with 2 deaths or 2 adversaries, I'm just gonna use it, just get that Polaroid, just try to get in there and do as much damage. Although adversaries were kinda mean, because every time I used my Ivy Bag to get invisibility, they ended up flying in the air and becoming invisible. So that wasn't, I would say, the ideal course of action in that case, but it definitely was something that kind of, I think, justified using a little bit of health in order to stay safe. Because when you think about it, you know, even if you do lose some health and lose some points that way, we're still getting money, because we get the Ivy Bag and we have the Swallowed Penny. So it's not like we're losing points per se. Obviously, we're going to be left at a net negative, but we're kind of paying that price for not getting hit. And if you ask me, pay 20 points per room to not get hit, that's a very good deal, and something I would definitely take. Maybe that would be an interesting item, something that tampers with your score and makes you invincible, maybe, and like maybe you lose 20 points every single room, but you know that you're not gonna get hit throughout the run. Maybe that wouldn't be the best one, but obviously just using it, having the Ivy Bag does give you the luxury to use it very selectively. It's not a forced option. You don't have to use it in every room. You just use it whenever you feel like you're in danger. So with that said, we did come to the end of the run. Our item penalty was actually quite lower than I expected. I feel like I picked up like 12 or 13 items, which I figured would be a higher item penalty overall, and the rest was looking pretty decent. Obviously, damage penalty is gonna be high because of the sacrifice room, but also I did take some hits of damage, which maybe I shouldn't have taken, but you know what you're gonna do about it. And all in all, I would just call this a very standard run, nothing too exciting, nothing too, I would say, desperate either. It was just right in the middle, and because of the Mom's Knife, I do feel like this run was made a little bit more interesting, even though Mom's Knife tend to have, I would say, an opposite effect on the run as a whole. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.